Snow drifted softly across the small frontier town of Cedar Ridge, the kind of snow that seemed to hush the world into silence, covering the rough edges of wooden cabins and the empty train platform, where dreams often arrived and just as often departed. On that quiet morning, a woman named Eleanor Grace Whitfield sat on the edge of a bench, clutching a worn brown trunk that held everything she owned, her gloved hands trembling not from the cold but from the weight of disappointment. She had been a mail-order bride once filled with hope, her heart warmed by the promise of a man who had written to her from miles away, telling her he longed for a wife, someone kind, gentle, and faithful. Eleanor had answered with sincerity, never hiding that she was in her 40s, widowed, young, childless, but still full of love to give. The man, Thomas Barrett, a rancher from Montana, had written back that age didn't matter, that character and heart were all he sought. But when she finally arrived after 3 days of riding trains, after praying and dreaming of a new beginning, Thomas stood at the station, looked at her silver hair beneath her bonnet, the fine lines around her eyes, and his smile faltered. He said nothing for a long moment, then stepped forward, his voice as cold as the wind. "You didn't tell me you were this old," he said. Not cruelly, perhaps, but sharply enough to pierce her heart. She stammered, tried to explain, but his eyes shifted away as if ashamed. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he continued. "I can't marry you. I need someone who can bear children." The words echoed like a gunshot. Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. The conductor, seeing her frozen on the platform, tipped his hat and said they'd be closing up soon. Thomas walked away, leaving her standing in the falling snow, alone, unwanted, rejected for nothing but time and truth. She didn't cry at first. She just sat clutching her trunk, staring at the steam curling from the departing train as if it carried away the last of her hope. Around her, the station emptied. A child pointed at her and whispered something to his mother. The mother hushed him and hurried away. It was as if her very presence made people uncomfortable, like a ghost of something forgotten. Hours passed. The sky dimmed to gray. Eleanor's fingers grew numb, but she didn't move. She thought of her late husband, Jonathan, who died in the war 20 years ago, leaving her with nothing but memories and a ring that had long since lost its shine. She had spent her best years caring for others, neighbors, children, sick relatives, lonely widows, while her own dreams crumbled quietly. When she answered Thomas's letter months ago, it was the first time in years she had dared to imagine happiness for herself again, and now even that had been taken. She whispered to herself, "Maybe it's too late." Her voice broke. Snowflakes melted on her cheeks, though she barely felt them. The sound of boots crunching in the snow startled her. She looked up, expecting to see Thomas returning out of pity, but instead saw a tall man in a heavy coat, his hat dusted white. He was watching her with curious eyes, not judgmental, not pitying, just calm and warm. "Ma'am," he said gently, his voice deep and steady. "You'll freeze out here." She blinked, hesitant to respond. "I'm fine," she lied. He smiled faintly. "No, you ain't," he said, stepping closer. "No one's fine. Sitting on a bench in the snow with tears on their face." She looked away quickly, ashamed that he'd noticed. "You waiting for someone?" he asked. "No," she whispered. "Not anymore." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Well then, let's get you someplace warm. The inn's just up the road." She wanted to refuse. She didn't want pity, but something about his tone felt different. He wasn't offering help because he saw her as weak. He was offering because he saw her as human. She nodded slowly, and he took her trunk as though it weighed nothing. "Name's Jack Callahan," he said. "I got a ranch up north. Came to town for supplies." She introduced herself quietly. "Eleanor Whitfield." He smiled. "Miss Whitfield, it's a pleasure." They walked through the snow-covered streets, the lamps flickering dimly against the dusk. At the inn, he paid for her room without asking, saying, "You can pay me back when you can." Or never at all. She wanted to protest, but gratitude overpowered pride. He nodded politely and tipped his hat before leaving. That night, Eleanor lay in the small bed, listening to the crackle of the fire and thinking about Jack's kindness. She didn't know him, but something about his eyes, steady, kind, and worn like someone who'd known his share of loss, lingered in her thoughts. The next morning, she woke to the innkeeper knocking on her door, with a tray of breakfast and a small envelope. "That fellow left this for you," she said. Inside was a short note. You don't deserve to be left in the cold. Miss Whitfield. If you've nowhere to go, my ranch has room for one more pair of hands. Jack Callahan. She stared at the note, torn between fear and hope. She had trusted once and been broken, but the handwriting felt honest. The offer genuine. After all, what did she have left to lose? She packed her few belongings and followed the directions to his ranch. The journey was rough, snow knee-deep, wind sharp, but as the land opened up into rolling white fields and pine groves, she saw the smoke of a chimney ahead. The Callahan ranch stood proud and solitary, a place carved by hard work and solitude. Jack was outside chopping wood when she arrived. He looked surprised but pleased. "You came," he said simply. "I wasn't sure you would." She smiled faintly. "I almost didn't." He nodded, setting the axe aside. "Well, I'm glad you did." He helped her down from the wagon, took her trunk and led her inside. The house was simple but warm. Stone fireplace, wooden beams, the smell of stew simmering on the stove. She felt warmth seep back into her bones. He showed her a small guest room and said she could stay as long as she needed. "You don't owe me nothing, Miss Whitfield, but I could use someone who knows how to keep a home." She smiled and agreed. Days turned into weeks. She mended curtains, cooked meals, and brought life to the quiet house. Jack worked long hours, but he always made time to sit by the fire and talk. He told her about losing his wife years ago, about how the land had kept him going. She listened, shared her own story in return, and soon the silence between them grew comfortable, even meaningful. But the shadow of rejection still lingered in her heart. One evening, she found herself looking in the mirror, touching the gray in her hair, wondering if perhaps Thomas had been right. Jack caught her gaze and said softly, "You know, Miss Whitfield, gray looks mighty fine on a woman who's lived brave." She blushed, laughing lightly for the first time in months. He smiled. "Don't let fools make you forget your worth." Something stirred in her chest then, a quiet, flickering warmth she hadn't felt in years. One morning, Jack returned from town with supplies. "Ran into Thomas Barrett," he said casually. Eleanor froze. "He told folks you'd gone back east after he turned you away." She lowered her eyes. "I nearly did." Jack frowned. Man like that wouldn't know a blessing if it sat right beside him. She looked up, tears threatening to fall. "You think I'm a blessing, Mr. Callahan?" He met her gaze. "Ma'am, I think you're the strongest soul I've met." And for the first time, she believed it might be true. That night, as snow fell softly outside and the firelight danced on the walls, Eleanor sat by the window and whispered a quiet prayer. Not for love, not for youth, but for peace. Yet deep inside, she felt something growing, something she hadn't dared to name. Hope. The kind of hope that blooms quietly after a long winter, fragile but alive. As she closed her eyes, Jack watched her from across the room, his own heart stirring with something he thought he'd buried long ago. He knew she was different, not a girl chasing dreams, but a woman who'd weathered storms and still stood tall. And in that silent moment, both of them, without a word, began to heal.